Well, hello everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Morgan Malcolm, and this is my channel, Love Where You Live. So today we're going to be talking about the steps you would need to take if you plan to purchase a property. Now, this was something that was requested, so I'm really glad that that seems to be working. That's exactly why I started this channel. So if you do have questions about real estate, buying, selling, any part of the process, please feel free to message me or get a hold of me on any of those social medias I have listed below. If you haven't yet subscribed, please hit subscribe and click that notification bell so you know when I do any new videos. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So let's say you decide I want to purchase a property and you've never bought one before. So this is first time, either you're renting, live from home, whatever the situation is, you are buying for the first time. The very first thing I would recommend doing is talking to a lender. So this could come after you've talked to a realtor, but I would recommend starting with the lender if you have one that you can speak to, if you know of one that you want to use. So the reason we want to do this is for a first-time home buyer, you're unaware of what this process is like. So we need to see what you can afford and kind of get you familiar with the monthly payments of what a purchase price looks like when you're buying it to what that's going to be monthly for you and all of the things that go into it. And really the only person that can tell you what your monthly payment is going to be that lender, because there's a lot of factors into it. Not only is it going to be different loans based on what you're looking for, if you want down payment assistance, if you need a fix-up loan like a 203K loan, if you're getting just a conventional loan or any of the government-backed ones, so an FHA or VA if you're a veteran, something like that, the lender's going to know the most about those. And there are going to be differences in your interest rate based on your credit score, income, your work history. So there's a lot of things that go into it. And we really need to know what that purchase price is to really move forward at all. So that's why I always recommend speaking with the lender first. You'll have that pre-approval done. And then you can go ahead and meet with a realtor. Now, if you have absolutely no idea what lender to use or anything like that, and you're not comfortable meeting with them, I would say then skip to number 2, which is meet with a realtor. So realtors have lots of relationships with lenders. If they don't, I would be very leery of that realtor because we talk to lenders all the time. So I recommend at least 3 lenders if someone asks me for a recommendation, because based on, what they're looking for, each lender has strengths, and then personality wise, some people like a different way someone handles something than someone else. I always recommend talk to all of them. You don't pay for that first initial, you really don't pay for anything until you close, unless there's an appraisal in there, which we'll talk about later. But you're not going to have to pay for it. So you might as well get an opinion from multiple different places and see what's the best loan you can possibly get. And let them know too, hey, I talked to another lender. This is the rate they got me. Is that something you can do better on? Can you do the same? Can you maybe cut some fees of some sort to make it so that I want to use you instead? Just seeing what that is. And then the lender's track record is also going to come into play. So let's talk about number 2 though, going and meeting with a realtor. Now, if you've gotten referred a realtor or you're interviewing multiples, you're still going to want to do this all at the same time, because it's hard to go see properties with multiple different realtors. They're going to bombard you with lots of properties. You kind of want to pick one and then start looking at properties, but you can do it however you want. This is just suggestions based on my opinion. So I have people come meet with me. I discuss my expertise, my background. I've had my license quite a while. I've had awards. I know a lot of areas because I did flips for a while in Colorado. I think the bigger part that you're going to want to focus on is the personality. You want a realtor that you trust their opinion, because they're going to be advising you on a very large purchase. And you want someone that you think is really good at their job, because sometimes you're competing, sometimes there's other negotiations that happen later on in the process, that you really want to have someone that you think is strong enough to be able to fight for you and actually win and get you what you want. So after you've met with a realtor, I do have a video on questions to ask and why you'd want to hire a buyer's agent. So I'll link that. I'll put a card up wherever that is. And I'll link it below as well, so you can watch that if you want more details on the realtor part. But after you've met with one and you decide on one, they're going to have you sign an agency agreement with them. In Colorado, we're one of the few states that you can be a transaction broker. So I can work with both the seller and the buyer, or I can work with a buyer and someone that I have been related to. That's the transaction broker side. It's not as typical, but it does come up. So I would explain that part in that meeting of what that means. But most of the time I would be a buyer's agent. So I'd work specifically for that one buyer that you hired me for. We'd sign a document that gives me the right to give you advice and to help you do showings and write contracts on your behalf. We're also going to talk a lot about what you're looking for, which is the fun part. So now we're at the fun part of properties. So you get to describe basically your wish list. And I always like to have buyers get as specific as possible with everything they would want, like their absolute perfect property. And we start there. And if we're not going to, like I do a search and we can't find many properties that fit everything they want, we start pulling back. So I start taking off some of the things that they're like, oh, it would be great to have a 3-car garage, but we're fine with 2. All right, we'll drop it down to 2-car garage and see how many properties come up. And then we just keep going until we find enough properties that we want to go look at, and we start doing some showings based off of that. We also keep on that, so you get active listings whenever they come on the market, stuff like that comes up. But then we do a lot of showings, and you know, in the market that we're in right now in Colorado, showings go quickly from the showing to the offer. There's usually not a lot of time. So I want you mentally prepared when we're going into it to say, if you like this property, be prepared to go home tonight and we're writing an offer and you will be putting that in later today. This is how quickly we're moving because, you know, if you wait, then you're in a multiple offer situation and you could already be in a multiple offer situation where we have a deadline and you do have to move quickly. So being prepared for all of those things, knowing the market is going to be on the realtor and asking them, you know, are we going to possibly have multiple offers or is this something that's not common right now? What's kind of going on with the market? That's going to be a part of that interviewing that realtor. And then this is also why it's important to have that lender already pre-approve you because you can really no longer submit offers without having that pre-approval. It is very rare that a seller will accept an offer without seeing that pre-approval. And most of them are putting in their listing that they're requiring a pre-approval letter from a lender with all offers. So we can't even submit it without that. So you really need to have all of your things ready to go, and that's why we kind of do it in this order. So let's say we've looked at properties and you find the perfect one, we put in an offer and we get it. So we're under contract. So now we go into the contract dates and deadlines. This is what you're signing when you're signing the offer. And I think people look more at the purchase price and the closing date, but then all of these other deadlines, the dates, they're like, they just trust the realtor knows what they're doing. But you really want to kind of look at that because it's you on the line. You're the one that's actually doing these things for these deadlines. So let's go through some of them. Unfortunately, each state is a little different. This is going to be based off of Colorado contracts and what we do here in Colorado. And a lot of places will have similar things, but they might have a few things added in. And I'll talk about a few that I know of, but if there's anything else, your local realtor should know of what those are and then be able to talk to you about them. So what first usually happens, so let's say we're under contract, the very first thing I usually have as a deadline is going to be earnest money. Now, people do not understand earnest money for any reason. I don't know why, but it's one of those mystery things that people know they have to have but don't understand it. Earnest money is a check or personal funds, however it's put in the contract, some type of money that you are going to give to the title company or a third party to hold until closing. It needs to be funds that are readily available. So I get a lot of times people will give me a check for it and say, is this going to be cashed now? And I say, yes, it will be cashed immediately, but the funds will be held until closing and applied to your cash that you're bringing to closing. So it gets applied to purchasing it. It's not addition to, it's applied to it, but it is cashed right away. So you need to have the funds readily available for what that is. The amount is negotiated. The seller will put it in their listing what they are asking for, but you can always negotiate that if you feel they've asked for too much or if you want to strengthen your offer and offer more. That's always been an option as well. So Earnest money is usually one of those things that happens within 2 days about. Another one that happens right away is the new loan application deadline. So this is one that you met with the lender and you did the pre-approval, but you may not have started the loan process yet. Some lenders wait until you sign all the documents. You have to do certain things to start that. If you have not started it yet, you need to do that within about 2 days as well. So it's basically just going in and getting the lender the permission that you're going to use them and you want them to start the loan. So that's going to happen within the first couple of days. The other thing that comes up pretty quickly are due diligence documents and all of the disclosures, including seller's property disclosure. So this is one that the seller has already gone through and signed. They've done all of their disclosures, things like source of water, which is important if there's a well or any water rights or where the water's coming from, square footage disclosure. A big one is the seller's property disclosure, where the seller really goes through and lists anything that they know about the property, basically. Some sellers are better at filling this out than others. So look through it. It may not be filled out to the standard you would be looking for, and you can ask more questions on it. But these are all things that are provided to the buyer and need to be signed by the buyer that you've at least received them. So you're also going to get a lead-based paint disclosure. So if a property was built prior to 1978, the seller is going to be required to provide a lead-based paint disclosure, which basically says if the seller knows of any lead-based paint or has had it tested and then knows of it or knows it does not have it, they disclose that to you, and then you have options of either moving forward with it without testing it or having the property tested, and then you sign this disclosure with the contract. It is now not needed the exact time, but we basically sign it at the time that you write the offer. There is also a termination deadline that you can have in there, so if you choose to have it tested, we're going to have to take a little time to get the test result back, and we have a termination deadline in case it comes back as positive for lead-based paint and this buyer does not want to move forward. So that deadline is usually later on in the contract, but we get the disclosure up front. So amongst the disclosures, you're also going to get due diligence documents. So in the Colorado contract, it's section 10.6 is due diligence, and it basically is saying the seller is required to give you any documents that weren't covered in anything else that they know about the property. So for instance, like if there's an HOA and there's a special assessment that they know is going to become up, but it isn't in any of the meeting minutes for some odd reason, they still need to disclose that to us. Other things could be basically whatever we write into section, it's 10.6.1.2, and I will fill that in with anything I can possibly think of that we want that's relevant to the property. So let's say it has an unfinished basement, but we know that the seller had intended at some point to finish that basement. They may have hired an architect or had blueprints drawn up to finish that, and we may want those documents if they have them. If they did do any surveys or ILCs while they were there, if there was any type of testing of any sort, basically anything else that happened to the property that they know of. We want all of the information we possibly can so that you make the right decision on purchasing this property and aren't surprised by something later on down the line, because that is never fun. So these are all deadlines that you get the documents, you review them, and if you're not comfortable with something and you don't want to move forward, you have to cancel the contract by your objection deadline for these. So those are usually pretty close to upfront. So the other one that you're going to have is if the property is in a covenant controlled community, so an HOA, you will get the HOA documents. Now, a lot of people, I'm not going to say a lot of people, there are people that don't really review these, but I really recommend doing it. They look at certain parts, like let's say if they have a dog, they look for certain breed restrictions, or if they want to possibly use this as a rental, there could be restrictions on allowing rentals, short-term, long-term, Airbnbs. They may have some of that written in there that you can or cannot do some of those. So you're really going to want to read those for sure. But then reading the rest of it is also important because it can have some little funky things in there. Like if you want to change your mailbox, you may have to be required to do a certain one. There may be requirements for paint colors, for lawn care, for fences. certain HOAs have more restrictions and some have less. So this is why it is important to know what you're getting into. The other thing you're going to want to read is you're required to get, the seller's required to provide you at least a year of the meeting minutes and a year of financials. Now, these are important to make sure if something happens to the property that's supposed to be covered by the HOA, let's say there's hail damage, that there's enough money to cover it, to fix it. If insurance doesn't fix it or for any reason something else happens, they have enough reserves to fix stuff. That's going to be in the financials. In the meeting minutes, we're going to want to read that to see if there are any special assessments coming up or any big changes to the HOA that you need to be aware of that could affect your decision to purchase this property. So looking through that HOA stuff and not being surprised by some of those things later on, really big deal. So actually review them. And again, you have deadlines to cancel the contract if you don't like what you're seeing in that HOA documents that you were given. Okay, so pretty early on, I like to have title work sent to us. So that's one of the deadlines that some realtors put towards the middle of the deal, but I still put that geared towards the front. I put it in basically, while you're reviewing documents, you might as well review title work. Title work is best explained by the title company. So we usually have our representative. I like to have mine reach out to my buyers and just kind of go over what is title work. I'm going to do a sit-down video with my title rep and actually go over it. So if you have more questions on that, I'm going to do a video with her and explain much more about what title work does and what you need it for. But basically, we want to make sure that once we close on this property that you actually own it free and clear. There's no one else making any claims or anything else that could come up where someone says, oh no, there was a lien on the property, you owe us money, or this is my property, you couldn't actually legally own it. Those are things that title is supposed to be protecting you from, amongst a lot of other things. But basically, you'll get the title work. This is not something that you sign, but you review it and ask questions on it. So next, we're going to move forward to the next part of the contract deadlines, which is going to be the inspection. I do the inspection, or I have my buyers do the inspection very quickly. There are several reasons why, but basically if a contract's going to fail or get canceled, most of the time it's because of inspection items. So the inspection is going to be ordered by the buyer. You have to pay for the inspection outside of everything else. So be prepared that that money is going to come out of pocket. I think people get surprised sometimes when they're buying their first property. There are extra inspection things that you can do for the inspection. So above and beyond just inspecting the property, I always like to have buyers get the sewer scoped. In Colorado, we always do a radon test. Not always, but I recommend doing a radon test. And then if we think there's mold, you can do mold testing. There's some other additional things that you can add on, but those are the big ones that I usually recommend unless something in the property is saying I need some other expertise coming in. So a big one would be structural issues. I may have a structural engineer come in and review it, or have an structural inspector come look at the property. So there are those things. If there is a well is your source of water, there are extra tests that need to go into having the well. So you're going to want it tested for its potability and flow. Basically, you want to make sure and see if it's contaminated, either from runoff, like animal feces, things like that's getting in it, or anything from underground is contaminating the water so you can actually use it. And then also how the flow is and how much water it's producing. It kind of gives you an estimate of the life of the well. So wells can be expensive if they are at the end of their life, because you have to properly close it down and like seal it. So it has to be sealed properly, and then a new one has to be dug. And depending on the water sources on your property, that can get pretty pricey depending on how far down they have to dig and where the water sources are. So you really want to test all of those and have a good idea of what the well is producing and make sure it's going to be there for a while. If not, you may want to renegotiate some of the purchase price to accommodate some of those things that you're going to have extra expenses for. Other things to keep in mind is if there's a septic tank and it is not a sewer system like the public sewer system, so you have a septic tank, It is required that the seller gets a certificate from the state saying that it's cleaned, it's been serviced, we have all of this information. The only reason that this needs to get brought up is because if sellers are not on top of it, it will delay closing. You can't close without having this all done and the documents all prepared. So just know ahead of time, if you're looking at properties that have some of these they're not abnormal, but not traditional, like public water, public sewers, things like that, they're going to possibly take a little longer if you're not on top of them right away. And as a home buyer, you just want to maybe research it and make sure that's something you're willing to do, because it does take different types of maintenance for it to be functioning properly, and make sure that you are getting the most use out of your well or your septic systems. Now, if the buyer has someone in mind that they would like to use for the inspection, they can go ahead and use anyone that they want. This is their person to hire. If they need referrals, I have referrals for my buyers. The agent should have referrals for their buyers. In the worst case scenario, you would go and do Google searches, ask for recommendations from friends or family, do an inspector based on reviews. Try to get as much information about who you're hiring, because they're going to be the ones you're trusting their opinion on, just like anything else in this deal. So they're a pretty important part. So as long as all of the things in the inspection are either agreed upon or the buyer is fine with them, we will move forward. So that's where we go to this next one. So next, I usually have the appraisal and survey. They're kind of interchangeable on timeline. But let's talk about the appraisal first. So for us, the appraisal is lumped into the loan. So the lender is going to be the one that hires the appraisal. If you are paying cash, the appraisal is optional. If you are getting a loan, I have never seen it be waived. They can do some different things, but they usually have an appraiser for the property. Basically, the appraiser will come out and just verify to the buyer and the lender that the property is worth what you're paying for it. So they will go out, look at the property, find comps, so comparable properties that have sold within the last 6 months or a reasonable amount of time within a certain amount of area, make adjustments based on the differences, because no two properties are the same, and then come up with a value for that property. So that is what the lender is willing to lend to. If that value is higher than what our purchase price is, say we offered $500,000 and the appraised value is $510,000, that is great. The buyer now has $10,000 of equity. We don't even need to let the seller know about it. We are moving forward because the appraisal is good. If that is under, the appraisal comes in at $490,000, then we start to have some issues. And now we're starting to negotiate again. So what can happen is the lender will not lend more than what that appraised value is. So they will only give you $490,000 for that property. You can, as the buyer, bring $10,000 more to get up to the contract price of $500,000. Some buyers have the ability to do that, some do not. It is going to have to be money that is not a part of anything else with this deal. So it can't be taken out. You can't reduce your funds to close by $10,000 and bring that cash. It is additional money above the contract as it is standing. So the other option is having the seller come down $10,000. So basically what we're saying is, seller, we thought the property was worth more. Someone's telling us it's not. We can't purchase it for more than what the lender's willing to give us. We need you to come down. Some sellers will do it, some will not. Sometimes we meet them in the middle. So they come down $5,000, we bring $5,000, or the buyer can cancel the contract. It's usually at this point in everyone's interest to try to make this work because we're pretty far along. People have started making arrangements for moving and things kind of are rolling at this point. But if it can't work, it can't work, and we will start this whole process over with a new property for these buyers. So that can happen at the appraisal. But let's say everything's good, the appraised value comes in fine, and we move forward. The next one would be the survey. Now this happens about the same time because we need time to get the survey done if there needs to be one. Surveys are basically telling us the property lines of the the actual thing that you're buying, the property, whether it's land, a house with land, just the house on like the full boundary, whatever it is. We want to know what those boundaries are, and basically they want to know if there's been any changes that weren't recorded. So if somebody put a fence in the wrong position, or if there's an easement. So sometimes utilities will have to Excel will have to put a box in certain properties, and they have to have access to that. So that's an easement now on this property. So anything like that that's not already recorded and known about, that can come up and cause some red flags, and we need to change title work to address those things because title will not cover any easements, things like that. So basically, if surveys are required, the lender can require it, the title company can require it, a buyer can want to have it. It's not necessarily required, but they can ask for it to be done. It would be something, again, like the inspection that the buyer is paying out of pocket. And depending on what type of survey they want to do, there are two types, probably more, but there are two major types. So one is an ILC. It's basically going off of what's been recorded and seeing if there's any changes to it that, weren't recorded already. And then there's the full pin survey where someone has to go out, find the actual pins for the property lines and redo the survey and basically drop a whole new one. The major reasons that surveys are required by either the lender or the title company are if they see that the property's been a flip, because flips tend to either put in fences, additional structures, make changes to the property that could have changed some of those boundaries or messed them up in some way. Or land property, they really want to see what the boundaries are, make sure there wasn't anything that's not known about the land since no one's living on there. Those could be things that have changed. New developments might also have them to make sure that they were done correctly because no one has actually lived on it before. It's not an established area. It's a brand new one. So those are things that could flag it to be required. Some sellers have their survey from when they purchased it, when somebody else did it. And we can use that sometimes. So we try to work around it as much as possible. But some buyers just want to have a survey done to make sure what they're buying is what they're buying and everything is done correctly. So that is always an option. So let's say everything's good with that. Then we're moving forward. So close to the end, maybe the middle, I'm going to have a property insurance deadline. Now, this is one that people are like, why is this in here? So for Colorado, we have a lot of properties up in the mountains, and some of those properties have huge fire risks, or we have properties that have flood risks, which can make your property insurance incredibly expensive. So what we had is a lot of people purchasing properties up in the mountains, not realizing it, and then getting quotes for property insurance, and it is so much. They would have not purchased the property had they known that. So now this is a deadline that we have where you can look into it and see how much it's going to cost to get insurance and just make sure it's a value or a price that you're willing to pay for that property. And that's one of the deadlines that we have. So moving on, the next deadline that can come up is going to be a conditional sale deadline. Now, this is one that doesn't always happen. So it would only happen if you had you owned a property and you were selling that and you needed to sell that property to fund this one. So the only way you were buying this property is it's conditional on the other one selling. If you're a first-time home buyer, you're not going to have this deadline because you don't have a property to sell. So one of the last deadlines that comes up is going to be the loan objection deadline. Again, if you're paying cash, you won't have this. Hard money may or may not have it depending on the hard money lender. But most of the other loans are going to have a loan objection deadline. And what we have for this is basically the lender's required to give you the final numbers of everything you're paying for, closing costs, all of that stuff. I don't know why I'm not in focus. Okay. There we go. So all of those things that you're going to have to pay, and you get to approve it before the loan. So this can also be things like somebody gets laid off right before closing and you no longer qualify for your loan. You're not going to be forced to purchase it because the lender is not going to give you a loan at this point. You can also mess up loans if you take out credit cards, buy a whole bunch of things for your new house before you've closed on it. So make sure you don't do any of those things. Keep everything normal until closing day. But the loan objection deadline is basically you're comfortable with what you're paying for the loan and everything's good, looks good, you're ready to go, and you're really aware of all of the things that are going into this, and we're ready to move forward to closing. After we've gone through all of that, we're going to have our closing date. Yay! Closing dates are, they're fun. There's a lot of signing documents. It's basically everything's already been decided. There should be no surprises. You should have seen the numbers from the lender prior to closing. I will also send out settlements from title companies. So there are two different versions of the same numbers, but making sure everything matches. As the buyer, you will be required to bring whatever agreed upon amount of cash to close. Now, usually this is best done either by a wire or cashier's check. If it's a certain amount, the title companies will not accept that cashier's check and you have to do a wire. They usually say, depending on your closing time, if it's early in the day, you need to have sent out the wire the day before by noon because wires go out at set times. So just make sure you've sent the money ahead of time because they will not fully close the property and you will not actually own it until money is clear and everything is in. So closing date is again going to be a ton of signing documents. Check with your title company on what they require. Some title companies want just a driver's license. Some of them want 2 forms of ID. I've had people where like the husband drives and the wife left her purse at home and she didn't have her ID. It's like, so you will have to go get it. You have to have some proof of who you are. So then after we've closed, let's say everything's good. We close, everyone's signed, it's happy. Now, your possession date and time may not be the same as your closing date and time, and I'll explain. So in the contract, there's a closing date, and then there's a possession date and a possession time. Sometimes sellers need time after they've closed to move all of their stuff out. So it can be 72 hours, 24, 48, whatever number it is. If it is more than 72 hours, we usually do a post-occupancy agreement, and that would have been negotiated way in the beginning. You would have known about it that the seller wanted a post-occupancy agreement. Basically, the buyer bought the property and then becomes a landlord to the sellers who live in the property, paying rent or not, having a security deposit or not, whatever is negotiated in that post-occupancy, up to 60 days. That is the maximum they can do it. If you want it to be longer than that, then you have to actually write a full lease and then you actually become like a legit landlord at that point. And lenders probably won't let you do that because you purchased the property, depending on how you wrote it, as a primary residence. If you did not, then you can possibly do that. So that'll be something that you would know ahead of time. And if the seller needs to have that, have your realtor explain what that means. And I always recommend having a security deposit because you never know what someone's going to do, and having some sort of rent because you are paying for the property now. Okay, so once you have signed everything, the possession date and time has come. If it's the same date and time as closing, then you're good as soon as you're done and funds have been released. Or whatever that date and time is that's negotiated in the contract comes, then you now own the property. And yay, you're a homeowner now. So I know for other states, there are some different things that are in their contracts, and I don't know all of it, so you really will have to refer to whatever agent you're using in your state. But some things to keep in mind are other states for inspection items might have things like termites that you need to look into, or dry rot, mold, because Colorado does do a mold test, but not required. Some places you absolutely need to do it because most houses have it. Things like that are pretty typical for that area or that state. That will be stuff that your local realtor should know and will advise you about. And then some places require an attorney to be a part of the transaction. Colorado does not require an attorney to be a part of it, although buyers have the right to have an attorney look over all of the documents. If you are having an attorney, I would say give yourself a little bit longer closing time. Typically, we have a 30 or 45-day closing. So from the date we're under contract until you own the property and close on it is usually 30 to 45 days. I would give yourself the 45, maybe 60 days so that attorneys can look it over and approve it. So this has been all of the steps that would be involved from the very beginning to the end of purchasing a property, and especially one in Colorado because that is the contract I kind of went through. There is some more details that I would go over with my buyers, so this is a general guideline of the things, and if you have questions, please always leave me comments, ask whoever you are using as your realtor, but let me know what you thought. I hope that was helpful and pretty much explained everything that it could, and helped you out on how to purchase a property. If you do have any comments, please feel free to leave those below. Leave a like if you liked the video, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when I do some more videos. All right, I'll see y'all next time. Thanks. Bye.